who walked mountains and the heroic peace pact. She's a convener, Peace Commission of the IAW Geneva and the Secretary General of All India Women's Conference. And in conversation, the third interaction we have is Ifat Nawaz. Her debut novel, Shurjo's Clan, was just released by Penguin in November 2022. In 2016, she published a non-fiction titled Untold Stories of Tangwar,
Howard,
a collection of true accounts of a local community that lives in a water basin at the border of India and Bangladesh. Her writing has appeared in the Zuban books Cosmopolitan India, Himal South Asian, Indian Quarterly, and the Daily Star. Since 2018, Ifat has been living in Pondicherry, where she is devoted to the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. So over to you, Anne, Manju, and Ifat, and to the wonderful audience to truly making this an immersive experience. It's a conversation, and should you have a question, please always refer back to them. And thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Sudha, and thank you, Anne, for being here. Let me begin by just a phrase of the book that is at the beginning that struck me like a thunderbolt, because it actually, in a nutshell, sums up what the book is about. First of all, Anne, I'm truly grateful to you for writing it. It has been an extraordinary experience, and my life would certainly not be as rich as it is had I not read it in a rush in these last few days. It's a book that's called a keeper. So having said that, the story is about Annette Boumanon, who is a French woman in Brittany, southeast of France. And the book begins with, she does not believe in God, but he no doubt believes in her. And if he does exist, then surely he made Anne. And why does the author say that? Because Anne is the stuff that heroines are made of. And the whole book really is about what is the meaning of heroism and how does it translate into a woman's life at a time when there is political upheavals in the world and the larger space that mankind inhabits is in turmoil as to what actually makes for truth and what actually goes as truth without being truth. And that is my personal take on it. But having said that, let me tell you a little bit about the book, the linear progression of how the book goes. It begins when she's 95 and yet she's not yet born. And that sentence in itself is like a conundrum on life itself, that what is and isn't. It is about, as I said, a young French girl growing up in a farm and in a rural context. And she has, what again struck me, because I'm a grandmother myself, so one of the sentences is she has two grandmothers, and like each of us, the second one is a grandmother she loves less. I felt guilty immediately because I kept wondering whether I'm the grandmother that is loved less by my granddaughters, and I have to rectify that. In 1929, she's about, I think, 5 years old, who owns a bicycle, and the bicycle is like a metaphor all through. It's about movement, it's about back and forth, and it's about how we travel through life. So I see the bicycle being repeated again and again. By 1936, she is 12 years old. But being 12 is a time of awakening. It's a time when a child becomes on the threshold of being an adolescent and a woman. And in the larger world, much more is taking place. It's the Spanish Civil War. It's the beginning of the brown shirts that are, going to have, they had a putsch in Germany, and much more is going to come in the form of Hitler and the Nazi world. And Mussolini is ruling Italy. So a lot of that part of the book refers to the migrations of people, which this 12-year-old notices in terms of the Spanish people who keep coming into her village and into her surroundings. And then it goes on to her engagement with the resistance, the French resistance, and the Communist Party. It also tells you a lot of what heroes are made up of. and it also ends up what heroes really aren't. So a lot of the book, in my take, is not just building up to the act of heroism, but also taking down what an ideal, an idealistic world means but isn't. She marries Roland and has 2 kids, and then of course through 1939, 40, 42, 44, till the Allies actually liberate France, we see her engaged in espionage and counter-espionage and taking all kinds of risks for others. Because the dominant thing in Annette is she lives for justice. There's a fire in her which says life is about a cause, living for a cause, a mission. And that is the most important thing to her and who she is. So she is though a cog in the wheel of the resistance, but in being that cog in the wheel, she plays a very important part in being someone who is absolutely sincere to what her commitment is. She has a second marriage to Joseph Roger, who is a much more celebrated resistance leader, post-liberation, post the Second World War, where she's in Lyon and Marseille later on. But looking across the waters on the other side, she sees actually the fight for justice isn't really over. The fight for justice continues because the same country where she fought for liberty, equality, fraternity, that is in France, becomes the oppressor across the water where Algeria is. And the Algerian movement for independence begins, and she takes part in that post the 1954-55, where she becomes involved with them. But she sees that the party that she espouses, that is the Communist Party, actually is not taking a strong position. And she finds it strange that a party that is supposed to be for the oppressed says we're not about nationalism, we're not about Algerian nationalism, we're about workers of the world unite. Because as you know, the Comintern had been formed in that time, and the Comintern was about uniting the workers all over. And so they distanced themselves from the Algerian struggle for independence from France. And Charles de Gaulle, this legendary heroic man who had liberated France, in her size becomes a little more puny, because when it comes to giving the Algerians independence, they do not seem to feel the same rules that apply in Europe. They do not apply to the Arab world. She does get involved with the resistance of the Algerians, but by and by she gets caught, arrested, and then the same Annette, who had always been this figure of absolute tenacity, resistance, purity, is vilified as a slut and perhaps a prostitute. Why? Because race begins to figure. And the race meaning that the man she was with, Georges, doesn't end up as being really an European. He's actually an Arab. And because he's an Arab, then she is a slut for the Islamic world. And these other connotations of the Islamic world colliding with the Christian world, and how the Christian world then judges the Islamic right to, Arabs to have, break away from France and declare that, Algeria is an independent country, goes on, and she gets imprisoned for 10 years, and finally, of course, she gets out of prison, and that's another saga. But having said all this, all I want to say is not only the book, the material of the book is so intense and dense, you don't want to miss a single line, because each line is loaded with referencing both of the classics, of other literature, of political events, and of language. So the richness of the texture is like a cross-cutting jacquard weave of the highest and most complicated and complex threads. And they are woven together in a way in which the storyline doesn't lose its intensity and curiosity for the reader. So much information, so much knowledge, so much learning, yet delivered in a way in which the reader responds to it with just curiosity. You start humble, you end up having lived a very heroic experience yourself, having encountered this book. Stylistically speaking, Anne has done an incredible job because it's written in the epic style like the Iliad, and but it goes back and forth, just like, you know, the gurgling stream or the tides of an ocean, and that kind of way in which it is structured is just beautiful to behold. So with this introduction, I move over to Ifat, who has a lot more questions for Anne, and I hope I have aroused your curiosity to read the book.
Thank you, Manju. Hi, Anne. Definitely have lots of questions for you, and I agree wholeheartedly with Manju Di that this is an absolute must-read, and I'm going to reread it because of this reason, that I was reading it in a fast mode, but such an intense book that I had to swallow, and Anne adds these pauses in between where she says, pause, and you really need to pause because the amount of incidents and emotions and what you have been told you need to sit with. So it's, you know, a moment of silence or moments of silence that I needed. But what was interesting to me, and my first question to you, Anne, would be, often we read about heroes and heroines much after they have passed on, you know, they're martyrs to a war or something like that, and we never meet them, and the researchers then gather pieces from interviewing their close ones. But you had the opportunity to actually meet Annette when she was 95 years old and sit with her and you know, really transfer all this knowledge and stories and so much more. So my question was, how was that experience? How long did it take? And how were you able to embody it in the way you did? What was the point of relation that you felt with Annette and you, Anne?
Yes, so first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and for your interest in the book and in the destiny of Anne Beaumanoir, of Annette too. And thank you for the presentation. Actually, I met Anne Beaumanoir a few years ago by accident. I mean, I was not looking for someone who had been in the resistance and who had been fighting against colonialism, but I was invited to south of France, a little city, and she was in the audience. And at the end of the event, people could ask questions and say, do some remarks, and she stand up, and I saw this, at the time already very old, 95 years old, woman, hunched and with this very white hair and light blue luminous eyes, and this very beautiful old woman standing up, and I can't even remember exactly what she said, but she struck me so much by her appearance, her way of speaking very vividly, much more vivid than I speak, and she was so lively and so, and of course I was, when she started talking about her life a little bit later on in the evening, actually I sat close to her, and we went to dinner after that together, and she sat close to me at the table, and she talked a little bit about her story, and I was thinking, oh my God, why I was sitting there on the podium and saying stupid things about, I don't know, I was feeling really so little in front of this woman who had experienced so much dangerous things and who risked her life several times, and not just once, for a better world, you can probably say, but also in a very concrete way for saving human lives, because what you didn't say, I think, was that during the occupation of France by the German Nazi troops, she saved the life of three Jewish teenagers, children, and unknown people. She was a very young girl. I mean, not even 20, I think, or just 20. And she went to this hiding place. Someone told her there are people hiding in this area of Paris, and she went there and said that to them, "Well, come with me. I take you to another shelter." And she managed to save them. And the two people she left behind, the adults who wouldn't come with her, who wouldn't like to come with her, were deported and were murdered. So she really saved these people. And this is something, I mean, I wrote this book. I'm German, but I'm living for a long time in France, in Paris now, for 40 years actually. And so I'm a little bit French too now. But my history and my family history is, of course, is a German one. And as a German, I was very moved by this woman who saved Jewish people. I mean, as a German, you are born with the burden of the Holocaust and of what Germans did to other people, and to Jewish people especially. And so I was. So it was like I was amazed and moved and by this little woman, little small, not little but small old woman. So and then I learned that she had written a book, a sort of memoirs, and which was published in French by a small publisher. And I read the book, and it was so fascinating. It was full of very interesting details. But you know, this was the kind of book someone would write for her. She wrote it for her children and great-children, great-grandchildren, and that's what she said. And that's probably a little bit what it was. It was, and I realized that she had all the qualities I don't have. I mean, the courage and the determination, and she was really a woman of action, as I am more a woman of reflection and of dreaming, and so and she had all these qualities, but she was really not a writer. And so I thought it was a little bit a pity that this book was so interesting and telling her life, and not only her life, but all the kind part of European history. But it was written in a way that, I mean, probably there were few people who read it and who would read it. So that's when I started thinking about writing myself a book about her life and telling her life in another way. And as she appeared to me really like a heroine. Maybe we can talk about the concept of heroism later on, because I have, as a German, I have a problem also with this, with the word and with the concept, because it has been instrumentalized and there's a lot of manipulation about heroes in history. But I thought I could, to this small and hunched and old and frail woman, the word of heroine would be fitting, and I thought, but actually there is a very ancient literary form, a genre, in which the deeds, the brave, courageous acts of heroes, not of heroines for the moment, were told in literary history, and this is the epic. And so I thought, well, this is the form, the literary form that would suit best. but at the same time, I couldn't, I mean, time did go on, and we are not anymore in Homer's time, or in even the Middle Age, and I had to a little bit modernize the genre. Especially, I tried to do it. I couldn't use this elevated high tone they use in the traditional epic. Also because this wouldn't suit to what Annette has been, the person I met. So I introduced sometimes some colloquial terms, or something that, how would you say in English, that would suit more to who she was and what our time is also. So that's what I can say.
And you wrote two original versions. The first one was in German, and the second was in French. And they're two different, of telling the same story, but they're both original. And the English translation is a combination of both. So, again, as a writer myself, I felt like how much force and drive did, Annette put into you to really go through the same version in two different languages, which I think is, amazing. So we can go back to that. But since you mentioned heroism, it'd be interesting to talk about that. And I think earlier in the week, we were having a conversation over email about today. And we were talking about the idea of heroes and what it is also for the subcontinent. And I just wanted to sort of, to have a conversation about it. Would be very interesting, because you just mentioned, the idea of heroism in Germany is a bit conflicted. There are, things that are attached to it. And for us, I think especially the generation who were born after partition and wars, the heroes were handed down to us. We have a lot of heroes to look up to. And so right now, the definition of hero is actually quite confusing, because all our life we have been trying to measure up to the heroes who had a very definite mission, just like Annette. It's like you're working for justice that you think is just, and therefore you have to win over, you have to have the Sri Aurobindo, who, we are celebrating his 150th anniversary with this LitFest, and he was one of the fathers of this revolution that started in 1905 here in India against the British. But, so there were such giant personalities, and we read a lot about also the ones who were less giant, but, that one name of Khudiram, or, we learned that these is what you do for the country. And then there's Annette, who's similar, doing the same thing on the other side. And so now, in this current context, I would love to know what your idea is of heroism for the young generation, especially when we are not, when we are handed down. I'm not as young, but even younger ones. When we are handed down such personalities, who do we call heroes, and how important is it for us to retell stories that the history has missed out on telling us? I would love to hear your ideas on that.
Actually, in the book, I think I never used the word hero, heroine. It's only in the title, and in the German version, it's only. And in the French too, it's only in the title, and in the title it's the name of the literary genre of the epic, which includes the heroic side. There are always heroes in epics, but I avoided to use the word heroine in the book, because, as I told you, I have a problem with heroism. I mean, I don't deny that someone like Annette, other people, for example, by saving people, did really heroic acts. But I don't know about the Indian history, but in the European history, heroism is associated, in my mind, it is associated with national socialism and with the Nazi hero, the Aryan hero, and it is associated with the labor hero, the hero of the labor in the Soviet Union and in East Germany too. So the socialist hero. And both of them are not the positive hero types, and so it's something that is, as I said, really easily instrumentalized by totalitarian regimes to defend their ideology. And that's why I'm a little bit cautious with the word, but with not. I mean, with the word, but not with the acts. But the acts, it depends on which acts we are talking about. The fact to save lives is, as Annette did during the occupation. The German occupation of France, this is, of course, everybody would agree, I guess, this was a positive and a good thing to do. I mean, saving children is always a good thing to do. I think there's no question about that. But already when you are starting talking about fight against French colonialism and the liberation of Algeria, I mean, the end, the cause is a good one. The liberation of people from foreign occupation. They were invaders, the French, and they occupied the country. And so it's obviously it's a good cause, but then you have the problem of the end and the meanings. And the meanings, if the end is good, the meanings are most of the time violent ones. And this was a very unequal war because, of course, the French had much more military force, and there was no. I mean, they were constituting a sort, of course, an Algerian army too, but it was also a lot about like a guerrilla war where they were putting bombs, for example, in cafes in Algiers or in tramway. Trams, yeah, and you know, there were a lot of civilians killed or injured in these attacks, and there were babies killed, and so you have the problem. I mean, then it starts to be not so easy to decide whether this is good or bad. I mean, the end is good, but was it really heroic? Is it heroic to put a bomb in a tramway where children can die? But this is also where this question starts to be interesting for a writer, or for actually for anybody because all of us are. Sorry for my not so good English, but all of us can be one of these days in this kind of situation where we have to decide. You know, this, and there is a famous in Germany famous quote by our writer Bertolt Brecht, who said. I mean, I tried to translate what he said. What he wrote is that the people who don't need heroes. I mean, happy are those who live in times where there is no need of heroes. But and in Europe, for the moment, that's what we do. But times can really change very quickly, I think, and then we have to ask us this kind of questions.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think the world is going through that time at the moment, not just Europe. I think all of us are not in need, so therefore the celebrities that we see in television are our heroes for the moment, not so serious. But yes, you're right. There is, first, I think there is a lot more contemplation with the word hero as we walk into the 22nd century or wherever we are going headed, and sort of look into that. But you mentioned these lines in German. I really wanted to read just a couple of lines of your book, and it's just a few lines that I wanted to, because one thing that really fascinated me, Anne, was there were all these tough things I was mentioning, because it is a story that is intense. It's a girl who's been with the fire since the age of 12 and 16, and the fire is there in her. But then she really does, Anne did this beautiful thing where she would just add a few lines, and here is one. Annette was born in a fisherman's village near an estuary, so it was an open water, and it kind of, and the way she weaved it, you can tell that this, she had a touch of, the wind, the free wind and water and the elements of the nature to sort of make her who she is and to think more vastly, besides her family also being that way. So just a couple of lines, and then I'll hand it over to Manjuti for more questions. So she talks about two kinds of people living near in this town where Annette is growing up, but then she says, all who live near the estuary, even if they don't set sail, are turned towards the open water. And I thought that was so beautiful. I had to it really gave me chills, because, it's philosophical, and it, makes you stop for a moment. And perhaps I was biased because here in Pondicherry, we are also just by the open water, and we often forget it exists, but then, it is a blessing, and what it makes of us, the nature. And I think for a lot of the book, the geography and where she was, the way you portrayed it, really, the setting really played a big role. And over to Manjuti for more, if you want to have a comment on that.
Can I just say one thing about the estuary, because there is also one image, one metaphor in the book about this free water coming, because there's a moment in the year, I don't know if you know this phenomena in India, but when the water of the river flows out and the ocean water comes in, and there's a kind of like a wall, water wall coming up like this.
Yes.
And it's a very rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen often. So I use this for like a metaphor for resistance, because two forces confronting. Yeah.
Yes, it's beautifully written, that part as well. Yes. I remember it, and I have it marked in my book again. Yes. But a few more questions, and perhaps then we'll open up to the audience after that. So.
Well, if Anne, I could say this, that the part that for me was very poignant is when she's arrested in about, I think, 1959 or something like that. And the gossip that goes around and the way people talk about her in the press is as if she was a prostitute trapped into this relationship with this Arab who was pretending to be George's for sexual favors or for reasons that could only be, why would a woman get into this? Nobody bothered to look into her history of what did she do during the war. She was a member of the resistance. She took risks with her life. She carried information. She saved people. But in that instance, the media or the people around it blew up the whole episode as but if it's an Arab and it's a Muslim, so she must be this woman who is very low charactered, and therefore she got trapped into this. I'm drawing the analogy of things that happen today in our lives in politics, where people who were, as she said, you grew up thinking they were heroes, they did things for the country, they did things for us. And now vignettes of their lives come into newspapers, into WhatsApp messages, into social media, where the tables are turned and everything they did is forgotten because they are now vilified. And that is the nature of heroism and the nature of people who lead epic lives where they are there and they are there. And that's the nature of public opinion, which is so shallow and ephemeral and can't recognize when there is true worth. Her life, Annette's life, the way she goes through, I mean, it's a larger than life context, and yet how she ends up 10 years in prison for things that they will not believe that she was a believer. She was a woman looking for truth. She was a woman looking for mission. So there is a very feminist angle to it as well as a very political angle as to all these isms that we chase: nationalism, communism, socialism, and then there's the ugly side of these isms. And you have brought it out so beautifully, because without preaching to anyone, without taking sides, without being pedantic or without trying to say polemical, you have drawn the complexities of what it is to lead a political life and what is the ramifications of such people who take on these larger than life roles. So it's a comment rather than a question, but I'm amazed at your wisdom of bringing out these layers in the life of Annette, which would have gone probably without documentation had you not written it. So the histories of such people, what we call the hidden histories. I'm from the All India Women's Conference, and we are also looking into the histories of the unsung women who worked for India's freedom and today are forgotten. So, we share a little bit of that.
That's very, I'm very grateful and a little bit ashamed, because my wisdom is really not very great. It's only that, when you are confronted with this kind of person and life, you have to ask yourself some kind of questions, and you're more or less obliged to ask yourself, what, for example, what would I have done in certain kind of situations? And the answer I could give to myself and wasn't very encouraging, I have to say. I mean, I'm not sure to have her bravery and her determination and her sense of sacrifice also, because she really risked her life. I mean, she was saving these children, but even later on, in the colonialism, anti-colonialism, liberation war, Algerian independence war, there was a strong movement in France and in Algeria of French people who lived in Algeria and French people in France who were fighting for for a French Algeria. I mean, for the fact that they wanted Algeria to stay French territory, and they were committing a lot of bomb attacks and murders too. So she could easily have been murdered by one of these people. I mean, there were a lot of deaths. So, and she sacrificed her. I mean, she not only risked her life, but she sacrificed in a way her family and her children, because when she was arrested in 1959, she had 3 little children, and so she had to leave them behind. I mean, she went to prison, and then she miraculously could escape after a while, and then she went to Tunisia and then to Algeria. As she was a doctor, she was a neurologist. She was working at 62 when the Algerian independence arrived. She was working in the Ministry of Health, but she couldn't come back to France because she was still she had sentenced to 10 years prison by a French military court, and she couldn't cross the border, and they wouldn't let out the children, and so it must have been, I tried to imagine what it must have been. And this is also something specific about women's political engagement, because often when I did a lot of public readings, in Germany and France and in other countries, and people, most of the time women, are telling me, but do you really think this woman was a heroine? I mean, this is terrible. She left her children and she behind, and she their children grew up without a mother, and they were scandalized. And of course, that's true. But I think it's the kind of do you say reproach? I don't know. You would never hear about a man sacrificing his family life, even for just career reasons, and more for idealistic political engagement reasons. It seems to be normal and natural for men to do that. So, and for women, they are still bad mothers if they. I mean, she risked to lose her children in this way, but she didn't. I think that she did not take consciously the decision. I mean, nobody asked her, do you want to, what do you like more, your political engagement or her children? Then she would have said, I suppose she would have said, I choose my children. But I think she thought, as she was never arrested during the resistance, during World War II, I think she believed in her good star and the fact that she would go through and not be arrested. And then she was arrested. And then suddenly, from one second to the other, it's too late, and you can't go back, and the children were lost. Must have been terrible. And all this I tried to imagine when I was writing the book. It's something, I suppose, in her own book, she couldn't really tell, because I think it was too painful, and she was also shy and shameful about this.
Wow. Yeah, I think, I don't want to generalize it, but yeah, men are almost expected to take that role up if there is a war. You think of men, and then the woman, when it comes to women, we don't ever think that it would be in the front row. And even Annette, who was an informer for so long and did other things to kind of win her, like, yes, I am able to do something, I am capable, and I'm led by something higher. And the fact that, from early on she had it is probably what made her move through life like that she never questioned it. But I imagine that there was probably a big question in her, like you say, that there might have been guilt that she lived with. And that's something that, I think the way Anne has written this book really goes into those, in between the lines, those things are felt. So, I'm so honored to share the stage with you and Manjudi, and just, we started a little late, but I would love to just open up the floor for a few minutes and see if we have any questions. Most of us haven't read the book, but hopefully this conversation has, if it has.
This is the book. Well, I just suggest that you all pick it up and read it, because it's really an excellent book.
Yeah.
Epic, Annette.
And it's been translated in many languages, I understand. Yes. There's definitely German, French, yes, English, and will you be able to tell us how many?
And it says it's an international
bestseller. It's about 12 or 14. It's, for example, in Chinese, Arabic, a lot of European languages, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's definitely worth the read. And, pick it up, but I think this was beyond all of us here. It was about Annette and heroines and heroes like her, and even the word hero, something to think about for the rest of the day and maybe tomorrow to ponder on, and for the rest of our lives, what is a hero, and redefine. So thank you, Anne. Manju Di.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Anne, and I hope we will remain in touch for a bit.
Yes, and thank you, Auroville LitFest.